Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good evening. My name is Becky Ruthven, and I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters, and proud to be. First of all, I want to thank you for coming and also thank the library for co-sponsoring this event, and also to the Board of Finance and their participation. Thank you very much. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization encouraging the informed and active participation in government. And as such, we have created these events, which you'll see tonight, called Know Your Town, that we offer as a public service to the community. Know Your Town, we've already had a Know Your Town RTM, which I think was very successful. Tonight we have Know Your Board of Finance, followed by Board of Education and Planning and Zoning. So stay tuned. Also, we don't want to forget, since voter education is so important, we don't want to forget our young and potential voters. So this is going to be taped tonight and will be shown in the classrooms, in their civics education classrooms. At the back table back there, Celeste LaCroix, our president, will take your information when you want to join the league, and you should. And she has information and can answer any questions you may have. Now it is my pleasure to introduce, my privilege to introduce Joan Gilman, who's also a board member, and she will act as moderator tonight and introduce the panel. So thank you, Joan, because I know this has been quite a feat putting this together. Thanks.
Thank you, Becky, and welcome to everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. This program, Know Your Town and Know Your Board of Finance, is a wonderful project, and it's been a real pleasure pulling it together with members of the Board of Finance. We hope to run a program where they have a discussion about the board for about 40-45 minutes, and then we would love to take questions, and I will kick off some initial questions. But we're going to let the board introduce themselves. Thank you again for coming, and I'm going to hand it off to Lee Caney, the chairman of the Westport Board of Finance.
Thanks, Joan, and thank you, League of Women Voters. I have to say, one of your greatest events is the debate. I don't know if, I know some people in the crowd have been to the debate that you have for the candidates. I have to say I was terrified the first time. I wasn't sure what, I was new to politics. I wasn't sure what questions you were going to ask me, but they were all excellent questions. Anyway, as Joan said, my name's Lee Caney. I'm chairman of the Board of Finance. I've been on the Board of Finance for about 10 years now. I've been a resident of Westport for 17 years. We moved to New York like most everybody else in Westport, and I've had kids go all the way through the school system. My family's all been involved in the town, so it's a great place to live, and I joined the Board of Finance because I wanted to be involved in the decisions for our town, so thank you.
Good evening, and again, thank you guys as well. It's great to be here, and I also were very nervous before the debate. So my wife and daughter and I have lived in Westport for 15 years. Our daughter graduated 4 years ago from Staples, went to BC, we love it here. It's been awesome. I retired and was asked to to run for the Board of Finance, and it's been just one of the best experiences for a couple reasons. One is it kept me thinking, and second of all, it got me involved in the town. For most of my time here, I traveled. I was gone Monday through Friday for work, and so I didn't give back much to the town. And so I have found it very, very rewarding to actually understand what's going on and feel like there are things I can do to make the town better. So anyways, that's it. It's been awesome.
Hi, good evening, and again, thank you for having us and putting this together. I am the youngest member, the rookie, if you will. My name is Mike Keller. I've been on the board just since 2020, so learning a lot from the gentleman and the other folks on the board here. We moved to Westport in 2015, my wife and I and our two boys. I have kids who are still in elementary school, and that was kind of one of the driving factors for me to get involved a little bit earlier, to try and make some positive impacts where I could for a town that we love and a place that we're going to be and see the benefits of hopefully what are good decisions for the next 10, 15 years.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to start off and let's try to figure out how we get elected to the Board of Finance. I ran against Mike, actually, but it was uncontested. But anyway, Mike, do you want to lead off and tell you kind of how the process works? We're actually, Mike's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but the process worked pretty much the same probably from our local town committees, but why don't you lead it off?
Yeah, so we have some slides behind us that I think are helpful, and the first kind of requisite for this is you do need to be a town citizen, obviously, in order to run for a board. Once your qualifications meet that letter, you get to move forward here. The first is you register with the candidacy for the Register of Voters, and from there, that's kind of the campaign portion of the whole process. I'm sure everybody laments or sees all the signs out throughout town as you get closer and closer to election as things build. But as candidates, we're out there trying to meet as many people as we can, trying to attend the debates that you may have formally with the League of Women Voters, some that are done informally, and events at the beaches and things like that to just meet the constituents, get our positions out there as much as we can so that people get to know us. I think one of the most important things from a candidate standpoint on that is to have informed voters. A lot of times people don't know what issues are affecting the town. And I'm not getting into politics here, but I really think at a local level, we're really more concerned about what happens in Westport than we are what happens, even in Hartford or Washington, D.C. So for us, that's kind of the process leading up to it. And then as we get closer, you have the actual voting day, of course, where you'll see all the candidates out at the various polling stations making their last-ditch efforts, putting their signs up. And for our board itself, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead too much and fill in if we need to, we're a 7-person board, and you can't have any more than 4 individuals from one political party on the board at any given time. So whether that's 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 1 independent, you're always going to have that control in place. And it makes sense. You don't want a board that doesn't have any differing opinions on it. I think the best decisions come from civil discourse where you hear opposing sides. And so that's the reason for that piece of the structure being in place there.
And I think our board and other boards may be different in town, but our board does not vote among party lines. I think the only thing that really matters in terms of the election and one party getting 4 members and the other party getting 3 is electing the chairperson. That's really the only action, I think, along party lines. You've been on the board for a while.
No, I agree. I think for me, one of the greatest things about it is it's not politically driven at the end of the day. We're taxpayers like anyone else in this room or listening in, and so we try to make the decisions that we feel are right, for the town. I would say, though, just stepping back for a second, if you choose to run, and again, I think you would find from the 3 of us, we strongly encourage that, but if you choose to run, from a Republican or a Democrat side, both have committees in town that sort of go about the process of sourcing people interested in running for any one of the open, potentially open vacancies on any of the boards. And so you normally go in and you interview with them and talk to them. They've got a committee that'll walk you through questions. You get to know them, and then there's a choice made, right, in terms of who represents the party for that next round.
And what's interesting, though, that even though the Democrats or the Republicans can pick a certain candidate to run, if you get a certain number of signatures, you can go on the ballot in a primary. Now, I don't remember a primary ever happening with the Board of Finance, but it's possible. So just because the Democrats or the Republicans pick a certain candidate doesn't mean that will be the candidate that would run. Again, I haven't seen a primary in my time, so.
May I throw a question out that just builds on this? So people vote and you're elected and you take office, and then they want to share ideas with you. What's the best way for the constituents in Westport to communicate with the Board of Finance?
Well, I think if you want to speak to all of the members, there's an email address that you can plug in, and we all get the email, and you can ask a question or make a comment, whatever. We spoke earlier, and oftentimes after some of our meetings, we do get feedback from various people in town who both comment on the decisions made and the rationale behind them, and then sometimes they even grade us. And at first, I remember getting like the first, one or two of them, and I would be like, why is this person, doing this? You know what I found over time? It's a great way to get feedback, both in terms of, how I might have, or any one of us might have landed on a decision, and maybe come to you with something that you had not thought of. And so I find it valuable. So that's one way. But you know what the best way is, honestly? If you're out and you see somebody that's on a board, we live in Westport, it's a small town. And there's nobody that I've run into on any one of the boards, commissions that aren't willing to sit and have a quick conversation of something that may be of interest to you. So I would say those are probably the two best ways.
And also, like, for example, we just voted on the portables for long lots, which was a very controversial issue for our town, and people felt strongly both ways. So we get lots of emails when those decisions come up. The emails, to be frank, the emails, if we start getting the same emails from everybody, it's a form email. We don't read them all because they're usually a form, but when people write personal emails, not form emails to us, those I think have the most reaction from or at least from me on our board.
And then I think there's also the opportunity to speak at our meetings as well when an issue comes up. We always ask for public comment. So if it was something that you wanted to share, but not necessarily something you wanted to devote to any individual member, there's always an opportunity for comment that we listen to and take into consideration before we have any vote, or even if it's just discussion and we're bouncing something to another vote another day.
Well, thanks. So we're going to move on to the budget process. So we've just gone through, or almost through, the budget process, which is the operating budget for the year. And we already voted on the town budget. So there's two budgets. There's the town budget, which covers everything except the Board of Ed. And then there's the Board of Ed budget, and we're voting on that budget tomorrow. So you can come to Town Hall at 7:30 if you want tomorrow and watch us debate the Board of Ed budget. So anyway, Jim, do you want to kind of lead off and tell us how the budget process works? You want to start on the town side?
Yeah, sure. So, what happens is that within the town, the first select person starts, I think it's somewhere in December, where they start to marshal the various department heads and start to build their budget from the bottom up. And then starting in January, and so the fiscal year starts July 1st and runs through the end of June. So it's not linked to the calendar year. So in January, we start to have some dialogue with the town, the first select person, with regard to numbers. We'll usually sit with them and we give them a sense of what are some of the issues we think the town has, just to make sure that they're using them in their calculation. And then we get into February, and that's when we have workshops, which we held a number of them right here in the library. And that's where each department head comes in, and they will walk us through what they see as their expense, and if they have revenue, what their revenue forecasts are for the next year. And we ask questions, and we go back and forth. And honestly, I think the one thing, if you don't ever get a chance, you should try to take the opportunity to sit in on them, because you do see the people that make the town run. And it's exciting, it's fun, we learn a lot, and hopefully we provide some insights that help them as they continue to build the budget.
I mean, I've learned more about trucks. I was on a fire study, so I feel like I know a lot about the fire department, the police. It's really fascinating how sidewalks are made. I mean, and we get in at these informal budget workshops, we really get into the details with each town head, and also a lot of questions come from that. So that's not the end of the story. So we'll have these budget workshops, and we may have questions about the number of people they're hiring or some sort of metrics, because we have books that they give us with all the information for that year, but we always end up asking the department heads to go back and produce more information for us so that we can get comfortable on voting for their budget. And do you want to say something before we get to Board of Ed about line item in terms of how we vote on their budget, the Board of Ed budget? I mean, the town budget?
Yeah, so because it's different than the Board of Ed, I think you're alluding to. So for the town, we go line item by line item and vote to approve or not approve a specific item. And we can get into a debate. Usually not, because the process works where there's a lot of dialogue, so that by the time we get to the night of the vote, that there's usually not a lot of surprises. But we do have line item ability to veto or cut, a specific line item within the budget and revenue.
Right, and when we vote on the town budget, there's again, each department comes before us, and then there's some separate departments like the library and the transit district, which are separate from the overall town budget. So those are separate votes and separate organizations. Wakeman Town Farm. And there's one organization that's really not part of the town, but we always do appropriate money for, and that's Earth Place. And they've come to us every year for an appropriation. So what happens though is after we go through, as Jim describing, these informal discussions, there's a formal presentation by the first select woman to our board, and that happened a couple weeks ago. And then we vote on it. And then if we cut anyone's budget, they can come back to us for restoration and ask us, say, can you reconsider what you cut from us? And then it goes to the RTM afterwards, because we're not the ultimate say, right? So the RTM, so we recommend our budget to the RTM, and then the RTM gets to vote on it also, and it goes through their committees.
And just the one other item I would add is that when we're done voting, we go to the RTM and we actually make a presentation to them and give them a sense of, why we voted the way that we did before they in turn vote. So it's a great process.
And by the way, the RTM has overruled us. They've overruled us on the transit budget many years. And one year, it was very controversial, and they overruled us. We cut a little bit from the Board of Ed request, and they overruled us. And Velma, you'll probably remember that. Anyway, there we go. Mike, do you want to briefly talk about the Board of Ed side?
Yeah, so compared to what we can do on the town, we vote a little bit differently on the Board of Ed, right? We have some dialogue, but that's kind of a more holistic vote. The one thing that I always want to point out when I saw this graph, this pie chart for the first time, you look at this and you see how much education takes up of this entire pie chart. One of the most eye-opening facts that I learned in my first budget round is that out of that pie chart, 80% of that is salaries and benefits. And you think about where's all this money going sometimes, and you realize that there are certain value drivers that rise with our budget that are kind of out of control because those are all union negotiated. And so I always thought that was a very important point to have a good perspective on. But when you look at this and you see the number, right? So if you take that off and then look at I'm sorry that I'm kind of looking away from all of you while I do this. You can see where the rest of our money goes. And a lot of it is the important things that I think make this town so great. Public safety, our recreational departments, the library, things like that. And I don't know where else we wanted to go with this.
Well, just also on the Board of Ed budget, like Jim said, we can go line item by line item. With the Board of Ed budget, it's one vote.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't clear on that. That's what I meant by more kind of up or down holistic vote, right? We hear it, we can make our comments about it, but ultimately we vote yes or no on that. And that's not something where we can go in and say, well, we like 90% of this, but we'd like to go line item by line item on this particular section. That's not something that falls within our purview.
But also during the budget season, there's a ton of discussion among our board members about different issues that have come up. And we also talk with people in the first select woman's office, department heads, the Board of Ed. We talk to them constantly throughout this process. It's not like we just sit here and get their presentation, listen to what they say, and then vote on it. It's a huge process of talking to everyone and a lot of informal discussion, which is allowed. There's something called FOIA, Freedom of Information. So we're not allowed to get four of us together and talk about the budget if we don't have a formal meeting. So if we got one more person here, we couldn't sit here and talk about the budget and our thoughts on it because that has to be a public meeting. So I can give Jim or Mike a call and say, listen, what do you think about this issue? And you can also caucus among your political party, but you cannot get just four people together and start talking about the budget. It all has to be in public, but there are a lot of discussions.
Yeah, and on that collaboration, just real quick, and kind of going back to something that Jim mentioned, when he encouraged you to come and maybe look through some of the informal discussions we have when we're putting this budget together in the workshops, I really can't say enough about the heads of all of our departments in this town. They are not just slapping these budgets together. They are well-informed, they are smart individuals who aren't just thinking about the operating budget for this year, but they're also looking, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, but they're looking at their capital expenditures down the road. And I think that's something that's worth mentioning because it shows people who not only are looking at immediate problems, but this town is full of people who have the foresight to try and envision what we have maybe coming up around the bend. And as taxpayers, I think that should be reassuring to everyone. And it's an excellent thing from somebody sitting on the board, too.
So just asking a follow-up question, it sounds like a lot of work, and most of you have day jobs. Can you maybe give the audience a sense of how many hours you're putting towards the Board of Finance during budget season and then maybe off-season so they can better understand how committed you are? I mean, this is a volunteer job.
I'm smirking because Jim was the one who kind of got me involved in here, and what he told me versus what it might actually be, or there might be a little bit slight disparity between that. But you guys have been around the block a little more than me, so I'll let you start.
Normally, during non-budget season, we probably have one meeting a month. During budget season, we have lots of meetings from January through when we set the mill rate, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So I can't even, like on the train home tonight, I was on the phone on town issues. I won't say exactly what they were, but I was on the phone. So and Jim's our vice chairman. I'd say we talk almost every day during budget season. I'd say I can't even imagine, maybe 20 hours a week, 15 hours a week, maybe a little less.
No, I think it's less when we're out of season, so to speak. So in the first quarter of the calendar year is when it's busiest. But once we get into the summer and the fall, I would say 20 is probably.
No, that's a little bit, not that much. Like in August, we're pretty. So unless there's a controversial issue that came up, for example, when Coleytown had the mold, we were on the phone constantly with each other trying to work with everyone and figure out what was going on. But it is a good amount of time.
Yeah, it is. And I would say that, and this would be a little bit of a pitch, but I think that one of the things that the Board of Finance can do more of is sort of an advisory role. Because the experiences that we have, I think where we've been able to be helpful is when we talk to the various department heads. I spend a lot of time with Peter Gold on the transit district, trying to really understand it. I think there's skills that can be tapped into even more so in trying to get to good solutions. So even working with the RTM, I feel like there's more that can go on in terms of a dialogue. So I think I find, not just because these two are up here, but these two and the other 4 members of the board are all really smart, varied experiences. And I think there's a lot that we can offer outside of just being in that once a month meeting and approving or not approving appropriations.
So this kind of leads in terms of talking to each other, this kind of leads into our capital appropriation. Because what we're talking about before that we just approved and we're going to talk about tomorrow with the Board of Ed is our operating budget. We also have a capital budget. And our capital budget is separate. And those are appropriations for certain projects in town. And we have a lot of projects coming up, don't we? Can someone want to lead it off and talk about some of the issues with our capital?
Sure.
And can we go to the slide on debt? We'll come up in a second.
So this one is very, very relevant in the world that we live in now. So what you should know and everybody should know is this town is safe, it's well funded, plenty of reserves, and it's been very, very properly managed for a long, long time. And so we should all feel good and sleep well at night with that in mind. I think that when it comes to the capital budget, these are projects that normally get, I think 100% of them are all bonded. So we go out to the market and we get funding and then we pay that funding down just like a mortgage for our homes, et cetera. And so they're big projects. They're usually multiple millions of dollars. And they come to the Board of Finance as an appropriation from either the Board of Ed or the town.
So Jim, so we can't say, I can't look at long lots and say, wow, they really need a new school, let's appropriate money, right? We can't do that.
That's right. We vote on them, yay or nay. We don't create them. We can encourage, we can implore, we can beg, but at the end of the day, they have to come from the Board of Ed and from the first select person. And so what we've come up with, and we're still a little bit in transition, we used to have a 5-year capital plan so that the town and the Board of Ed, they would sit down and they would look at whatever projects they knew were going to come up in that next 5 years that would be bondable and sizable. And they would put them by year onto this Excel spreadsheet.
Can I just explain to people what bondable means? So bondable means that it has a life to it, like your house, not like a truck is bondable because a truck can last 20 years, right? Or a school is bondable, or a firehouse is bondable. Paying money to our staff and our teachers, that's not bondable. It's not a useful life. So it has to have a useful life, right, to bond it. And with bond, and again, and this is going to a broad audience, what bondable means is we, like Jim said, we pay it over time. We don't pay it currently. We pay a little bit currently, but a lot over time.
With interest.
With interest. Sorry. Keep going.
That's a great point. Thank you. So it's been a 5-year capital plan, and we've just recently switched. So now that we go 10 years out. And the reason is it was driven primarily off of the sheer number of projects that we have and just trying to get visibility. And so you can imagine getting an accurate number 10 years out is not always so easy. But what we ask people to do is to give us their best forecast of what they think it will be in years 5 and 10. And if they're 60 to 70% accurate, that's probably pretty good, and we can fine tune that as we get closer to it. When it's within the first 5 years of the 10-year plan, there we ask for a much more firm number, because that's going to start to help us manage, right, how much debt we have and what it costs to pay that debt down. So we do a 10-year plan as we speak, and we meet in the first quarter of the fiscal year, third quarter of the calendar year, usually in that August, September time period. And that's where we really sit with the Board of Ed and the town and really get a sense, and we ask questions, very much like we do for the operating budget when we do the workshops in February, where we ask them a lot of questions. What's it going to cost? Why do we need it? All those kinds of things. And then it goes on the document. And then we also have conversations regularly as to how that's proceeding. Right now, there's more than likely going to be an appropriation for a capital plan for Longshore. New clubhouse, a bunch of different things happening there. That's being determined as we speak, and they'll come and they'll present that. So knowing how much they want, why they want it, all those things they're trying to process right now, so that when they present it to us, we ask questions, they give us the answers, and then we vote on them. So the thing I would say to you, when that's all said and done, and so the slide's there now, what you see there is in the year 2033, we may have north of $300 million in bonding, in debt. Right now, in an average year, we have about 100 million. So that's a substantial increase. And so you might say, first of all, what are all those things that are going to be built to the tune of 300 some million? Well, there's long lots may be replaced or may be in some capacity redone. That's anywhere from 70 to potentially $100 million. The Longshore capital plan, that is right around, I think, about $47 million as it sits before it comes forward for the appropriation. There's potential things that might happen with public safety. Help me, what am I?
Downtown,
Parker Harding Plaza.
Colliel.
So when you add all those up, it will come up north of 300. Now, I should just say, just like in a mortgage, as we add debt, we're paying debt down. So that it just, maybe that's not a surprise, but we're paying it down, so it does come down as we add more on. But you can see here, there's some big choices ahead of us, because that debt eventually falls into our P&L, right? And we have to pay that through property taxes.
So that's actually a good lead-in. So now we've going back to the budget, we've approved the budget. The RTM thinks we're brilliant, and they accept our budget as is, except for one thing, but we won't get into that tonight. And we all, by the way, we also vote on revenues. We vote on what revenues we're going to have, which is always kind of weird to me. And there's an estimate of how much revenue we're going to get. But the biggest item in terms of revenue is taxes. And Mike, do you want to talk about how we set the mill rate? And by the way, no one can overrule us on the mill rate, not the RTM, not the select person's office. That's our.
Yeah, it's the one thing we vote on, and our vote stands, right? So the slide behind me kind of shows where our mill rate falls in comparison to some of our surrounding towns. And I think that's a helpful slide because it helps put into context where you are paying your taxes at the rate of compared to maybe the town who's your neighbor, or a town that's compared to us because they're down the road but still on the water and have great school systems. And so when we get to the end of the entire budget process and the number comes in, whatever it is, that's when we have to figure out, do we have enough money to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it, in other words? And we take you guys have probably seen something called the grand tax list or grand list? Grand list, thank you. And the grand list is all of the taxes that you're going to get in the town. And so we look at that and we go per capita, what's that number? So per that $18 or 18 that you see is $18 per every thousand. And that number is where we come in at. Now we have some ability to kind of think about where that number should go based upon where the budget is. But when we get to that point, that's the end road for us. And that's kind of the end of the road for us at that point. Now, the goal, I think, for a lot of us is stability, and we want to be, kind of along a flat mill rate. Nobody likes that going up from 18 to 30. Nobody likes it going from 18 to 19, quite frankly. But you want to have a kind of a sustained structure to that. The way this plays into the last slide we looked at, though, is along with those increases potentially with the debt that we have, our debt service is also going to increase with that. And so these are all factors that we're looking at when we're making decisions. And eventually we would have to, potentially, if we were at that $330 million, at some point in time, the same mill rate at the grand list that we have would have to go up in order to succeed and keep the town as it is.
So, but in terms of setting the mill rate, it's not just a mechanical formula. We also have these reserves in town, and we can use some of the reserves to augment our budget so that we don't have to raise taxes, and we've done that. And we'll talk about this if we get some time in a couple minutes. We have guidelines for how big the reserves are, so we can work within those guidelines to reduce the reserve and use some of that money to pay off our expenses for that year, and therefore keep the mill rate flatter than it is. But it is a formula, and there are discussions. It's just not mechanical. We just don't get numbers from our finance director and say, okay, the mill rate is X this year. But again, as you said, we don't want to be where Weston is. Weston has no commercial properties in their town, so their mill rate is significantly higher than us, and other, if you hear people from Westchester or Long Island or New Jersey, their mill rate, if they take a house that's worth the house, like $1 million house in their jurisdiction versus $1 million house in our jurisdiction, they're probably paying almost twice as much in property taxes.
And I think to your point on the reserves, Lee, some of the good fiscal governance that we've had in the management of the town has enabled us. Most of our reserves are above, or at least before some of the interest rates have gone so bad, but they're all above where we need to be on our benchmarks. And that gives us that flexibility in order to keep the mill rate flat and take money from those reserves in order to maintain that kind of flat rate.
So to follow along when you have that discussion, is that August? When
No.
would the audience, July? When
That
are you
is-
setting?
Is that April or May? I think it's May.
It's May.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll do the operating budget, you do the mill rate, and then you do the capital budget.
Right, but the capital is just more of a discussion. It's not a vote.
Okay.
We know what's in the budget that's a capital expenditure for next year. So it's really the other 9 years. That's what we don't have to worry about that for the mill rate vote.
So Mike, also, I'm switching to our next topic.
Can I just say the one other thing I would say, so
He can talk about capital all day.
But in the spirit of being a taxpayer, right, we all have a vested interest. And I'm going to link two things together. So one of them, Joan asked us earlier, what can you do to talk to us? I think it's really important that you, whether it's email, whether it's bumping into us, whether it's our phone numbers, I think are also posted, get involved at what the town is choosing to do. Not because I think there's anything wrong or nefarious with what they're choosing, but there's just a lot of choices there. I don't know about you, but I can't buy everything I would want in life, right? There's some limitations there. And so understanding the choices, and then if you have a belief or a sense of what you would prefer, voicing that's really, really relevant. I try hard, and I think we all do, not to make choices that flow just from our own thinking. Our job is to talk, listen, and hear what you want, and then put all that together with the choices that are given to us in the form of an appropriation and make a decision. So I guess what I'm saying to you is two things. One is there's plenty of places on the town website which will document the downtown implementation plan, which will document the plan for Longshore. There's, I think, a website for the Long Lots School Building Committee that are going on. If you can, just take a few minutes, look, and then if you've got thoughts or comments, deliver them. Man, we want to hear more and more, because that makes a better and a more informed decision if we hear from you. Sorry.
I agree, and certain constituencies are a lot louder than other constituencies in town, and we want to hear from everybody, because we want to hear from people with kids in schools, with people whose kids have graduated, with people that don't have kids, singles, seniors, younger people. We want to hear from everybody, because everybody's a member of our town, and our decisions do affect everybody. A couple more things before we run out of time. Like I said, all of our meetings have to be in public, but when we talk about certain decisions, we vote to go into executive session. So, for example, if we're voting on contract, we don't vote. If we're voting on like a lease, like an example is we just voted on what's that? The Inn at Longshore. We just discussed the Inn at Longshore and whether or not we were going to approve that lease. We can have those discussions in an executive session. If it involves town personnel, we can have those discussions in executive session. If it involves litigation, we can have those discussions in executive session. So we do go into executive session for public safety. Sometimes we meet with our police department or fire department and have confidential discussions about certain issues that we can't have in public, and we have those in executive session. So moving on, Jim, do you want to talk about some of the, not committees, but analysis that we put into place, like risk review, capital forecast, insurance review?
If I put that on you, you're probably better at that.
Anyway, I don't like talking that much. Over the last couple of years, we've put into place certain reviews during the year. So like Jim said, we just don't vote on items. We want to look at certain items. So risk review, what are the big risks for our town? And we look at more from a financial perspective, but also from a reputational perspective. Again, we do that in executive session because obviously we don't want to highlight to everybody in town what major risks are. We have discussions about what our reserves are, because we talked about the general reserve, but we have all sorts of reserves, capital non-reoccurring, there's a cafeteria fund, there's about 15 reserves, 20 reserves. And we look at so we have reserves on reserves, so we have discussions whether those reserves are too small or too large. And I thought that was really important.
Yeah, we kind of similar to those same lines. We also have an audit subcommittee, which it's a few members of our board that are part of it, as well as some of our financial in-house for the town. And basically, it's exactly what you would expect from an audit. We're taking a look at what controls and risk management policies we have in place so that when we are making these decisions, we then hire outside auditors who come in and take a look at everything from a financial and transparency perspective so that we can learn lessons where we need to, and we can make sure that money is being spent wisely when it is spent. And we actually just completed it on Coleytown Middle School. And that audit, I think, along with all of the substantiating exhibits that back it up is, I think Lynn Scully just uploaded it to the website. So when you get done going all the websites Jim has recommended, I mean, if you go in there and take a look to see how that process went, and I think what was really great to see on my end, because this is before my time on the board, is how congratulatory the auditors were on how the process was run. And that should make you feel well when you spend that kind of money. And now look, when we spend that money, we do get an asset from it too, right? We do have a brand new middle school, and that's excellent. But to know that it was done well and it was run efficiently and without waste, I think is what we're looking for. And that's excellent to have that subcommittee in place for that reason too.
Yeah, that's really important.
And the reason I pushed Lee to answer that was because he's part of the reason things have been so well managed. How long have you? Many years you've been on it? A long time. Yeah, but you've been around long enough, and Brian, et cetera. You guys have done a lot to really put us in the position we are, and so you should be the one taking credit for that.
Well, thank you, Joan. Can I ask one more quick question?
Absolutely.
So far, what's the toughest issue you two have worked on, or most controversial, or toughest to decide?
Toughest to decide for me was probably the modulars that we just voted on for long lots. A lot of community engagement, which was excellent to see. Varying viewpoints on it. Some people supported it for one reason, some people supported it for another reason, some people were just adamantly against it for other reasons. And I mean, we had the entire administration there. We had teachers, we had parents, we had seniors, we had everybody there voicing their opinion. It was great to see the civic engagement, but that was a difficult one for me.
Ditto.
I would say the two most difficult ones were, and sounds ridiculous, was the bathroom at the beach, which I supported, because there was lots of opposition to that one. And another one was 1 year with the Board of Ed. We had cut like $350,000 from their budget, and it just became a wild ride. And I think the RTM overruled us that year, but it was very controversial, and it was a difficult issue. By the way, they ended up giving the town the $350,000 back, but that's okay. Anyway, I guess we're ready for questions now.
Absolutely, and I was just going to kick off with two and then turn it to the audience. But the first one is, you talk about being the newest board member. How does someone come up to speed when they're first elected? What is that experience, and what should people know about how the more seasoned board members help you adjust and learn?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think one of the things that you've heard is the level of collaboration, just not between our board, but across boards within town. So the people who are on this board are nothing but generous with their time. I mean, if I had a question and I called Lee or Jim, very generous, 15, 25, 30 minutes, what do you want to talk about? I've met with Brian for coffee before, him walking me through things. When I first got elected, Lee and Brian reached out and said, let's all grab drinks and get to know each other. So it's really a great camaraderie among people here. But the first year is kind of, you're asking the right questions or the wrong questions, just trying to come up to speed. But that first year, seeing it through a whole process, a whole kind of annual process, you learn a lot. And, you know, I'll steal Jim's line, you know, no matter what you're doing, one of the things Jim pointed out to me, which I think is very good advice no matter where you are in your career, your life, you're never going to not know more than in those first 9 months, right? And so the questions you ask, whether it's why do we do this way or why don't we do it this way, are going to be the most introspective and perhaps find a new way to do things. And so I think, you know, between the mentorship that was available on the board and then just kind of being a little curious about things and digging into the numbers and the big budget books and all the documents that are available if you look online, I mean, you just kind of by nature being thrown in the deep end, you learn one way or the other.
Anything to add?
Well, I thought you were going to talk about those thousands of hours of training that we went through.
Oh, how could I forget? Yeah.
No, but you should get to know this gentleman's name. You honestly, in the short time that you have been on the board, you've jumped in and you add just a ton of value. So
And
we're
change
better
votes.
off.
Changed our votes.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
My next question and is really to the younger audience that will have access to this video. Why should they get involved locally when they finish college and they move into a community, or even while they're in high school? But why did you, and what is the real value to them of getting involved in their community?
Well, everything's local, right? I mean, we have more impact, I think, on people's lives in Westport than the federal government and the state government. So it's really impactful. And to be able to get involved in your community, so I'm a trust and estates lawyer, and for the first 15 years of my career, all I did was work, and I loved my career, but you need something more. And I always tell our younger associates, find something that you're passionate about. Yeah, I'm passionate about what I do at work, but I'm really passionate about what I do on the Board of Finance. So, because you can really make a difference. And if you look out over the time that you've served and look at, if we've renovated Coleytown, we're going to have a new long lots. We've done things at the beach. We've done things downtown at Longshore. We've kept our mill rate flat. We made it, I think, a better place to live. You kind of feel really good about it, and you feel good for your kids. So I think that's really the reason.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is if you are young, if you are in high school or college, get involved because we need youth. We need a younger perspective. You're going to own a lot of this, so that 300 some million, I'm not going to see the end of that, right? And so we just get involved. We need it. We need the youth. Spencer, I see you sitting out there. I sat with you for a little while the other day, and it's great to see, you want to be engaged. And if you're young, get involved. We need it. The other thing is, I just piggybacking off of what Lee said, is it warms your heart. Honestly, there is a lot of time that you spend, and there are moments where you get frustrated, but you're adding value in your own neighborhood. That's really an amazing experience, right? And honestly, there's never really, even when we get a little bit feisty with the Board of Ed or the town, that little bit of friction, that's what democracy is, right? It's collaboration, and so it's worth it. So if you're older like me, it was just valuable because it filled a slot, it filled time in my day, but so much more was the value of that time. And you're not beholden to some boss being a jerk walking into your office late in the day, telling you, whatever they tell you. It's your choice. Get involved. The amount of time you put in, it's your choice, and I think you will be rewarded for it, and you'll find yourself giving more time.
And I do think the Staples, for example, the Staples students are very passionate. There's a group that are very passionate. They work on the elections, whether it's for the Democrats or the Republicans. They sit at the polls. It's terrific. It's great to see younger people involved.
No, I mean, they took all the good sound bites. I think civic engagement's important, and that can take form in a lot of different ways. First and most importantly is just getting out and voting, and hopefully voting with some knowledge behind what the issues are. Separate and apart from that, I mean, there's a lot of folks who have opinions, right or wrong, about what's happening, and a lot of people will voice those to everybody, but don't ever like taking the first step to trying helping in whatever form. And again, that can be anything from joining local groups and committees that care about the town, to trying to get elected, to taking any other form of it. So I just think whatever your personal comfort is your level of engagement. It's important to do that. In part, I do it for all the reasons that these guys said. Again, I've got two young guys too, and I like to try and set a good role model wherever I can. And so you try and get back to the communities you live in, and hopefully, as Lee looks around and sees all the projects, he can say, look, I left this a little bit better than when I found it. Not to get too sappy, but I love this adage that, society truly succeeds when old men plant trees that they'll never sit under the shade of, right? So if everyone had that goal, I think we'd be a little bit better off in this world.
Excellent. Well, I'd love to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions.
If the audience has any questions, please come to this microphone so that the folks watching at home can hear it. Thank you.
I've really enjoyed the camaraderie that the three of you are exhibiting, and it really makes me feel good about the kind of work that you will do. And my question to you is, now that you are sausage makers, how has this changed your opinion of our town?
Sure. It's a great question. I think the overriding look on the town I have now is that my wife and daughter and I are very blessed to have landed here. I think we're blessed, and whether it's the geographical blessings that we have with Compo and all the other things, but the town, the people were great, and I just think I didn't see it. I just showed up and I left, and I showed up and I left. And when you hang around and you talk to people, transit district, whatever those things are that people are passionate about, it's just great. It's a spirited discussion, and I think we get to good places 95% of the time. So.
And also, when you look at what's going on, I worked on the Hill for a semester in college, and at the time, I thought there was real smart people and real great discussion that happened in Washington. Now I really don't see it so much. But on the local level, I think we really have this. There's so many really intelligent, smart people on all of our boards, and the dialogue is terrific. And to engage with, I mean, we have really good people running this town. And as Jim mentioned before, you get to learn about a lot of our department heads, our head of our police, head of our DPW, head of our library, really great dynamic people that are running our town. And it's really, by being on the Board of Finance and seeing how the sausage is made, you see how great these people are.
Yeah, I think kind of the idea that it gives a little bit more faith back in that the democratic process can work well when good people are involved, right? Because if you look nationally, sometimes you lose a little bit of hope. But I've been here for only 2 years, and just to see how the town works, and nothing works without some bumps in the road, right? But on the whole, it works like a well-oiled machine, and that's very reassuring to me.
I'm kind of embarrassed because this might be a really stupid question, but it dawned on me that I wonder the impact of all these families that are moving into Westport. Maybe it's a stereotype, but my impression is that a lot of them are high net worth individuals. What's the impact on budget and planning, and or is there? I don't know, just curious. Thanks.
You're probably right. I haven't looked at the demographics, but I do believe that one of the biggest impacts is a lot of the people that are moving into town have young children, or children that are going to enter our public schools. So unlike other towns, the number of students is increasing in our public schools, which is great because we want our schools to be fully utilized, but it's also an expense, and it also leads to, for example, in the Long Lots area, I think a lot of the families, it seems, have moved into that area, so there's an overcrowding in Long Lots as opposed to some other districts. So I think, to me, that's one of the biggest impacts. Another impact is the value of real estate is going to go up, and so in order to tax everybody, our real estate has to be appraised every 5 years. So it's going to be interesting to see how the value of the real estate has gone up at the next time the valuation is done, which is is it next year?
25, I think.
So 25. So I think those are the two biggest impacts.
First, I'd like to say thank you for all the things that you're doing. It's been tremendously important work to be done. Now let me ask you the question that I think most everybody else has in America right now, which is, what is the impact of inflation and the increases in the interest rates that are going on as we go forth? I mean, obviously, we don't know where they're going to go, so what do you do with those?
All right.
I think we all wish we had the answer. Taking the interest rising cost of goods, inflation, and just let me give you a concrete example of that. Some of the things that we have voted on, some of the purchases that have been made were maybe accelerated earlier on when interest rates were low, or if we were going to bond them so we could get a better rate and everything along those lines. What ultimately is going to happen is there's going to have to be tough choices made. If things cost more money than we anticipated, we may not be able to afford it, or we may not be able to choose to afford it in that year. It may make more sense to postpone that for a year. So some of the discussions we've had, even in the last year surrounding that, are, okay, this is a need. Is this an immediate need? Or is this a need that maybe we can put off for 2 years and see where interest rates are then? And if that answer is yes, then we're trying to save money where we can by pushing those projects, if they're able to be pushed down the road a little bit. The interest rates are difficult because it makes borrowing money more costly, just like it does for anybody who's looking to get a mortgage right now, right? You were better off getting a mortgage a year and a half ago than you were today, and given the way things are going this week, probably than tomorrow for the foreseeable future. The difficulty for us is then that increases some of our costs. And so it's a kind of multifactorial issue. And I don't think there's any good answer or concrete answer as to how we get past that in the short-term future. I think we manage our risks as best we can. Every time we meet, we get kind of updates as to where things are as far as our pension funds and our OPEB and everything like that. The things we're always looking at is what you heard Lee talk about earlier. Where are reserves? Are we in those percentage points? And fortunately, because we were well funded before a lot of this, we were able, so far at least, to stay within those brackets.
And also our capital forecast, where we had numbers on our capital forecast. We said, okay, this project will cost X. Well, those numbers, because of inflation, aren't really good numbers right now. And that's something I think we all worry about, is that we thought a project would cost a certain amount of money, and it's costing, I wouldn't say double, but it's costing us significant more. And also, even in our operating budget, the cost of goods and services have gone up. So our operating budget went up, or it's going to go up more this year than it has gone up in previous years.
It looks like there are no more questions, so we are going to wrap up. But before I close the program, any final thoughts?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Jim, because Jim filled in at the last moment today. He's also filled in as our chairperson, but I thank you for filling in at the last moment today. I thought it was great that you could do that.
Well, can we give the members of the Board of Finance a big round of applause? We're deeply indebted to you for your service. Thank you, and thank you for making the time tonight to join the Westport League of Women Voters and educating our town on how you operate. So thank you very much.
And thank you, and thank the League of Women Voters.
And the library.
And the library.